Uh, It's lovely to have Abuna John with us. Always lovely and very generous with us here. God bless his ministry. Thank you, Abuna, for being with us, coming all the way from downtown. Thank you.
Such a pleasure and a privilege to be here, Abuna. Do you wanna put it further back? Name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever to the ages of all ages, amen. Maybe this is like if I make any references to anything that you would identify with, I promise I'm not like trying to expose you, or I'm not making fun of you or anything. I try to take life with a grain of salt and laugh about myself and the things that I do. So I hope I don't offend anybody. And obviously, if I say something which is not reflective of the what you think the church should say or do, I apologize and I ask for your forgiveness in advance. And I am very much still learning myself, and I'm open to correction, and I would be delighted to hear any correction from anyone at any time. With that preamble done, I meet people sometimes who've been seeing somebody, and they come see me for whatever reason. Maybe things are going well, maybe things are not going so well. Whatever, it could be either one. And I'll ask them their story, I'll ask them how they met and all of this, and they'll be like, well, in 1991, and I'm like, well, how come you've been dating for so long, right? And they'll say, oh, we're still kind of getting to know each other, you know what I mean? And I think, like, in my head, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to listen politely and I smile, but like in my head, I'm kind of thinking to myself, like, how long are you going to get to know each other for? How much is it to get to know, right? And really, are you really getting to know the other person or not? I have some pretty fringe ideas and beliefs about relationships, and I recognize that. And I recognize that a lot of the ideas that I have are kind of, I would be in the minority. And if you ask 10 other, people, counselors, priests, etc., more reputable than me, they might have maybe only one or two would agree with some of my ideas. But I still think that there's a lot of truth in these ideas. Not to say that other people are wrong, but that there's a lot of truth in this. I think, and I'm saying I think, not the Holy Orthodox Church thinks, or God Almighty thinks, but I think you are a much better judge of character than you think you are. And I think that you get to know a person a lot faster than you think it would take you to get to know that person. And I know that there's a law of diminishing returns. If you're in business or finance or whatever, this is like business 101. But I was never in business. I don't know anything about business. Every time I come up with a business idea and I discuss it with business people from my church, they look at me and they pat me on the shoulder and they tell me, God made you a priest for a reason, Abuna, right? So don't take any business advice from me. But what they have explained to me is that in general, it takes about 50% of the effort or resources or energy to achieve about 80% of the results. And then the other 50% of the effort that it takes is to help you to squeeze out that last 20%. And the curve, the curve of effort to profit or resources to profit is sort of something like this, and then it begins to plateau, right? And as it plateaus, the growth becomes so much smaller and if you want another way of understanding this is sort of like, squeezing out a wet dishcloth, like you've been doing dishes at at one of our community meals forever and ever, and the dishcloth doesn't dry anymore. So what do? You wring it out, And the moment you just pick up the the sopping wet dishcloth and you just pick it up and grasp it in your hand, water falls out with like almost zero effort, right? And you say, well, what if I gave this a squeeze? And again, it just pours water out. And then you're like, okay, well, I want to get this thing really dry, so what do? You squeeze it and you twist it and you twist and you twist and you twist and you twist. And now you've twisted yourself into like a pretzel, right? And there's still just a few drops left. I mean, to get those few drops that are left in there, you're going to go into muscle spasm. You're squeezing so tight, right? So there's such thing as a law of diminishing returns. You make most of the progress very quickly, very fast. And I think there's a law of diminishing returns when it comes to learning in anything that you do. That doesn't mean that you should, if you're passionate about something, you should stop trying to learn about it, especially if the thing you're passionate about is another person. And yes, I continue to learn about my 13 years married, only 13 years married. I continue to learn more and more about my wife every day. And I'm so obsessed with her and I love her so much that I don't mind if I'm exerting more and more and more effort. But as I learn much of what there is to learn about this person, it takes more and more and more effort to learn less and less and less at a time, right? I believe all of that to be very, very true. So when a couple comes and tells me, sorry, this is all the introduction. We're getting to the meat of the matter. When a couple comes and tells me that we've been together for anything over about 6 months, and they tell me we're getting to know each other, in my head, I say, fat chance. You are getting to know somebody, but the person you're getting to know is not the other person. You probably already know about 80% of what you're going to know about this other person, that you're ever going to know about this other person. And you probably know about 95 to 99% of what you're going to know about this other person before actually living with them. So you've been together for 6 months. I don't know how much longer you're going to be together to be convinced that you know what you know. And you're not going to know very much more. So you're going to marry this person, yes or no? Obviously, I don't say that. I'm far too polite to say that. I smile politely and I say, well, I'm so glad you're enjoying yourselves and hope it's going well for you and so on. And I gently start to introduce these concepts, this idea of a law of diminishing returns, this idea that you're probably much better at figuring people out than you give yourself credit. And you've probably learned most of what you're going to learn about this person. In fact, I'm so convinced of this. I would say, and this is my best guess, and I could be totally wrong, and I would accept correction from anyone because this is a very whatever statement, a very outlandish statement. I think within 5 dates, you've learned 5 one-on-one, you and the other person alone with no other distractions have learned probably about 80% of what you're going to know about this person before moving in. And if you want to carry on and have 5 more dates after that, 6 through 10 or 20 or 30, or you want to date them till you're 80 years old before you decide that you know what you're going to know, at some point you have to decide, this is the data that I have, okay? This is the subset, and I know I don't know everything, but this is all the data I have, and guess what? This is all the data you're gonna get. So, like, it's a binary decision, yes or no. Date them for another 10 years. You're not getting any more information, right? But you're still stumped. But okay, fine. I completely disagree with 90% of what you've said. But even if I were to give you the benefit of the doubt with all your wild ideas of 5 dates and so on, even if, right, what am I supposed to do? Like, I have been dating this person for 8 months or 10 months or a year or a year and a half, and I'm still not sure enough to take the plunge. What am I supposed to do? I'll tell you, there is somebody you need to get to know. It's not the other person. It's yourself, right? The question isn't, who is this other person? The question is, what do you want, right? When you walk into a car dealership, meeting a person, marrying a person is completely different from buying a car. I agree. It's a terrible analogy. It's horrible. I'm so materialistic, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I agree. I'm a terrible person. No, don't worry. There's a whole group of haters out there. You can join that club too if you want. But just accept it for a loose approximation for what it is. When you walk into a car dealership, a car salesman walks up to you, salesperson walks up to you, and they want to know in the first breath, are you buying today or not? Are you buying today or not? Even if you give them every impression that you are not ready to make a decision today, but you ask to go for a test drive, they'll let you go for a test drive, right? If you come back the next day and you ask to go for a test drive in the same car, they might ask you, like, what is it that you want to know? Like, maybe I can answer your question more efficiently than going for a half-hour test drive. But if you insist on going on a test drive, they will probably let you go. If you walk in a third day and ask to test drive the same vehicle, they're going to probably ask you, what do you want to know? Like, what more is there to know that you don't know, that you didn't learn in the first test drive or the second test drive? Like, I don't know, I'm a tall guy, my knees are always bumping up on the dash, like, you don't need to go for a test drive for that. Like, you already sat in the driver's seat. Like, you adjusted the seat, you adjusted the mirrors, you adjusted it. Did it fit or did it not fit? Like, how sitting in the seat a third time gonna answer that question? But after like going, car shopping is so hard. I find car shopping impossible. I can't possibly make a decision the first time I walk into a dealership, like what am I deciding on? Like, the car is red? Like, I can't, I'm saying the truth. Like it takes me like 2 months to choose a car. Like, I'm terrible, right? But what is it that I'm trying to figure out? What this car is all about? No. What this car is all about, you've got that figured out by the end of the first test drive. You want to do a second one to make sure like there isn't some big thing that you missed the first time around? Fine. Okay, no problem, right? But a third and fourth and fifth and seventh and 10th test drive are unnecessary. Why? Because of the law of diminishing returns. You're not really going to learn much more. What I don't know, the question I need to answer is what do I want out of this car? And as long as I don't have an answer for that, I'm not going to be able to choose. Or if I do choose, I'm not going to have a lot of confidence in my choice. So the name of the game is really not knowing the other person, but knowing yourself. And what is it that you want to know about yourself? Like your height, your hair color, your eye color, those things are obvious, right? So what is it specifically that I need to get my head wrapped around? You know what it is? This talk is entirely based on a very credible source named Meher Rojos, my biological father. When I told him about my now wife, he told me, I'm glad you met this girl that you're head over heels for. Now what you need to do is, now that you've gotten to know her, you're past that first stage of figuring this person out. You figured out, and he said to me, you figured out what you figured out. And what you haven't figured out, you're unlikely to figure out before you're actually married. So you need to decide whether you want to marry this girl or not. Whatever you decide, mom and I will support. My mom's on the other line. She's like, no, we don't. We want to know this girl. We want to meet her, blah, 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 right? And then, obviously they met her and they loved her and so on. But my dad says to me, the next stage is for you to figure out your expectations. I asked him, what does that mean? He says, your expectations are what you expect out of life. What are you hoping to do? What does life a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what does that look like for you? And what does that look like for her? And your expectations match up, or do they not? And I needed a little bit more explanation. He said to me, look, everybody has an idea of what their life would look like. And it's probably based a lot on what their life has looked like. Because that's all you know. I only know how to live life in that way. Don't worry, I'm going to give you a ton of examples in a second. And some of those expectations of life, my dad said to me, are negotiable. I would really like for our life together to look like A, B, and C, you know, but I would be willing to discuss it. Versus some other expectations you have of life are not negotiable. And they're not non-negotiable because you want to be a stick in the mud, or they're not non-negotiable because you just are one of those people who has to win every argument. You always have to have it your way, blah, blah, blah. No, they're non-negotiable because they're linked to your identity. They're linked to who you are and how you understand yourself to be. And really, if I was to change this about myself, I wouldn't be me anymore. I'd be some other version of John, but I wouldn't be John. For example, you know, like I'm a born and raised Coptic Orthodox Christian. Doesn't make me better or worse than anybody else. But what I've known and what I've seen is, for example, getting married in church. What I've known and what I've seen, for example, is if we choose to have children, if God blesses us in such fashion, then we would baptize the children in the church as infants. We wouldn't wait for them to turn 6 or 10 or 12 or 18 to make up their own mind. We're a community of faith, you know, and we make a lot of decisions as a community, much more than you think. And that's a separate topic, infant baptism, yes or no. But, you know, suffice it to say, yeah, I'm for infant baptism, right? It's not because I'm a priest, it's not because this, it's because that's how I identify, right? That's how I identify myself. And if you wanted me to change those things about myself, I would say, that's not me. Like you're asking me to be somebody that I'm not. So you're not really in love with me. You're in love with like a variation of me, you know, right? For example, though, I didn't mind at all. Like I asked my wife, now wife Mary, before we were even engaged, I asked her, so like, where do you imagine us settling down after we're married? In Canada, where I'm like licensed to do my previous profession, or in England, you know, and like I'm not licensed there, but if you want, I'll look into what licensing would look like and so on. And we can try to figure out like what we would do to support ourselves in the meantime, because she didn't have an income at the time, to support ourselves so that for long enough for me to get licensed and find a job and so on. Like I'm open to anything. Like living the rest of my life in Canada is not really a part of my identity. You know, in fact, I actually see myself very much as a citizen of the world, not a citizen of one specific geographic place. That's me. You don't have to feel that way. You do you, I'll do me, right? So, I mean, it would be a lot more practical to just kind of for me to stay in Canada, but I'm willing to go the second mile for you if you want to live close to your family or whatever, you know. I love my family. We're a very tight-knit family. We're very close. We're very this, we're very that. But I've already lived for 7.5 years, you know, 3 time zones and thousands of kilometers away from them, you know. The distance from Vancouver to Montreal is actually a similar distance from Montreal to across the ocean in England. So whatever, you know, we'll make it work, you know, we'll make it work, right? So I'd rather stay here, but I'd be okay to move away. That one's negotiable, right? But other things are non-negotiable. One of my non-negotiables, outside of like, you know, outside of the things that might seem immediately obvious, you'll probably have 1, 2, maybe 3 non-negotiables. If you have more than a handful, man, you are a difficult person to get along with. You probably don't even get along with yourself, right? Honestly, you know, we're not the non-negotiables here. They're not a list of 1,000 things. You know, they're gonna be they're gonna be 1 or 2 or 3 things. I've got this thing with like daycare in early childhood. I don't know. I just never wanted to send my kids to daycare during early childhood. I'm not against daycares. I'm not against whatever. I'm not against anything. Again, hey man, you do you. But you know, my parents didn't opt for that route. My mom gave up her career. She gave up her life really to raise us, and I just felt that I wouldn't feel good as a person, as a parent, if I didn't do the same for my children. If they didn't quite turn out to have all the opportunities that I'd wished for them to have, I feel like that was our fault. And if they turned out, you know, great, I'd think to myself, well, gee, how much greater would they have turned out were we to have really dedicated our first 2, 3 years of their life, really dedicated ourselves to them, as was done for me. So that's just my thing. You know, I'm not expecting anybody else to feel that way, and I'm not judging anybody else. You do you. I don't have any problem with that. But this is my thing, and no matter, and it's not a non-negotiable for me because that's it. Like this is the hill I'm going to die on. This is no, it's rational. Like I've really thought about this from every possible angle, and I can't imagine myself being okay with in any situation where, you know, we ended up putting our kids in childcare and, you know, in the early years of their life, the first sort of 3 years of their life. Well, so like that has really big implications, right? Because if you're gonna have a bunch of kids all like, you know, close in age, you know, suppose you have 3 kids close in age, all sort of 2 to 3 years apart, right? Then, you know, you're talking about at least one person being out of their job for a decade. And it's really hard to get back into the workforce after that. And if you get back into the workforce, like all of your colleagues, all the people who used to work for you, the people you hired are like directors now, you know, that's not easy, you know. It's a real sacrifice. It's a real sacrifice, and it's not something to be taken lightly. And I wasn't taking it lightly. And I was more than willing, this is another non-negotiable for me. I was more than willing to give up my 15 years of post-secondary education, to give up my career to be the one to stay home, right? And my earning potential, which was, you know, in the order of $750,000. So if you want your career, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. You go to work, I'll stay home. But like that $750,000 a year is also going to be staying out of our bank account. Well, half of it is going to be taxes anyways, but that's another story, right? Etc. Like basically, you can't have my future earning potential and your career. One of us has got to give it up, and I'm not going to be difficult about it. I'm happy to live poor and raise our kids the way I really think that they're best to be raised. I'm okay with that. But you can't have both, right? And that was one of my non-negotiables. And Mary was like, yeah, sure. No problem. Right? So anyways, so you know, okay, Abuna, like fine. I'm willing to go along with you. You do have some pretty crazy fringe ideas, this 5 dates thing. I'm not sure that I really have my head wrapped around that yet, but whatever. But how am I going to find out what these expectations are I have in my life, especially if I've been swimming in this soup for the last 20 or 30 years? You know, I don't know anything other. Like, you know, I don't know anything other than setting the thermostat to 26, you know? So all of a sudden I marry this person who likes the house, you know, at 20, and I feel like we're in the Arctic, you know what I mean? How am I going to know that, like, no, dude, I can't live, like, I cannot survive in an environment of 20 degrees, ambient temperature. Like I've never known anything other than 26. So how would I even know that that is like warm? Well, I don't know. You visit your friends or whatever, you know, and the thermostats that, you know, set to 22, and you don't know the thermostats what was set to. Like we don't take off our shoes and walk in and check people's thermostats, right? We just walk into their homes and we're happy enough that like they've welcomed us into their house, right? But after you take your coat off, you're like, it's a bit chilly, right? And you can't help but get curious, and you're like, does the heating work? Sure. And they're like, yeah, it's fine. Are you cold? Like nobody else is cold. And over time, you start to realize, like, maybe you get cold faster than other people do, or something, right? And that helps you to know a little bit of what your expectations are of life. But it's a very fair statement if you say, you know, my expectations have really never been challenged, and especially if you live alone. Living alone is like the worst thing in the world, right? Not because you're lonely or because of that. No, because you get to do whatever you want, right? And when you get to do whatever you want, you know, and after having done that myself for 7.5 years, it became really hard to live with another person, you know, and now I have to do what this other person wants, right? But I'm not used to that. I'm used to setting the thermostat to 20 because that's what I like. Our thermostat is set to 24. I walk around in my boxers with nothing else on. Please don't get a mental image. You'll be scarred for life, right? Because the house is so hot for me. But Mary likes the temperature at 24. So the temperature is at 24. And that's all my children will know. And they'll think it's normal for a dad to walk around in his boxers all day because they don't know that I'm just dying of heat, right? And then that will be their thing, you know, and then, you know, when they meet, like, you know, their significant others, you know, father who walks around in a full set of pajamas, long sleeve to here, they'll think it's so weird. They'll be like, when does he let loose? Like, when does he whatever? You know what I mean, right? And because they've only seen their dad, topless at home, and it has nothing to do with what proper attire is at home. It has everything to do with the thermostat, but obviously that was never discussed, right? Because in marriage, you try to do what pleases your spouse at your own expense because it's good for your soul, which is also a very important message, but a different topic. So we won't go there right now. So, Abuna, okay, fine. I need to know what my expectations of life are, negotiable ones, non-negotiable ones, and I really need to figure this out because that's what's going to help me figure out what am I really looking for? What am I really, not shopping, but what am I really looking for in a person? And that's what will make it easy for me within 2-3 dates at the most, 5 at the uttermost, to really know whether this is a person I can do. Yeah, this could work. This really could work, or no, the writing is on the wall. We can go on another 10 dates, 20 dates, 30 dates, 40 dates. And this isn't, for sure, this is just not going to go anywhere. So let's save each other the heartache. Let's save each other the time, and let's just cut it short because this isn't going to go anywhere. The only way you can really do that is if you really know yourself. So let me ask you a few questions. So you squeeze the toothpaste from the middle or the end? Who says middle?
But then you squeeze the end to bring it off in front. Are you guys okay?
Who says end? Who squeezes the toothpaste from the end? Who thinks this is a ridiculous question and they don't know who's the person who invited this lunatic to come ask us these questions? Pardon? There you go. Well, that's what every girl wants to hear. Yeah. Say that on the first date. Yeah, that's my dating advice to you, right? I had a grade 9 biology teacher who said, boys, no girl's ever gonna kiss you if you don't brush your teeth. Every guy in that class brushed their teeth like 4 times a day for the rest of the school year, right? You might say, well, these things are like ridiculous, and who cares where I squeeze the toothpaste from? You're right, right? But I bet you always do it the same way, right? And it's just to prove the point that this is what you do. This is how you live life, right? I had a colleague who was even more kind of OCD than me. He was really very, very, very idiosyncratic, very like only one way to live life. And he gets so annoyed with his wife that would always squeeze it from the middle. He squeezes it from the end, right? And I don't just squeeze it from the end, like I milk it against a sharp edge to squeeze out every last milligram of toothpaste, have a big fat plump, wad of toothpaste there. So you just have to pull the cap off and the toothpaste just, jumps out onto your toothbrush. It's like satisfying, like I get joy out of it. And then I go and and my toothpaste doesn't look quite right, and I uncap it, and there's no, it's just because somebody squeezed it from the middle. Somebody who I happen to be married to, right? So my friend, you know what he did? He took a big bulldog clip and he put it on the end, so she can't, even if she squeezes it from the middle, his wife, it still can only go one way, and it always stays fat and plump, right? Who cares about the toothpaste? The point was you have a way of living life. Fast forward, Mary and I are now married. We go on our honeymoon, we come back, it's a Saturday. At that time, SMSK's liturgies were on Saturdays. So went to liturgy. We came home. SMSK was like 3 blocks from our house, so we walked home. It was June. The weather was beautiful. It was dry outside. These are all very relevant details. You'll see in a second. And Mary's wearing these beautiful, really beautiful long leather boots, right? When we're coming home for like half an hour, there's a few dishes in the sink. So she walks in, she rubs her feet really well on the entrance mat, and then she walks into the kitchen and starts doing these few dishes, making use of the time before we head out again. Now, I've grown up, Mary grew up in England, I grew up in Canada, and I'm not used to seeing people wear their shoes in the house. In fact, I've never worn shoes in the house. So I say to her, trying to be as polite and gentle as I can be. Mary, most people in Canada take their shoes off at the door. She's washing the dishes and she looks over to me and smiles. And she says, oh, that's interesting. Most people in England don't, right? She continues washing the dishes. Take her hint, just take your shoes off, right? In my head. And I'm like, well, it's sort of normal in Canada to take your shoes off at the door. And she smiles and she goes, I'm British, right? She's a Canadian citizen now, by the way, right? And spoiler alert, now I'm the one who wears my shoes in the house. And this goes back and forth like 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Both of us being very polite and smiling, but I am seething inside. And I went and I sat on the couch and I'm thinking to myself, like, dude, what's wrong with you? Who cares if she doesn't take her shoes off? I'm like, no, people take their shoes off. Like, no, it's not okay. And like, whatever, and this and that, Like, I've never worn beautiful long leather boots. I don't know how much effort it is to put them on or take them off. And I learned all of this subsequently, as I got to know a little bit more that it's, a lot of effort and this and that. And she has like a medical condition, which she's a little bit less flexible than maybe she would like, and so on and so on. And all these things that have made it acceptable to me in the end that fine, as long as you don't track mud through the house, it's probably fine if you wear your shoes in the house. And next thing you know, I'm the one wearing my shoes in the house as well, right? But I certainly had an expectation that I didn't know about at all, and it really upset me. No joke. Like the toothpaste thing doesn't upset, right? I was just using that as an example, but it really upset me that she was wearing her shoes in the house, and I had to figure out a way around it. So, how do you figure out a way around it? You recognize this is more in a relationship than getting into a relationship thing, but just to complete the story, the story of the shoes, it doesn't matter, but your story, like what do you do if you have these expectations and it becomes clear that they're going to go unmet, right? You can't change other people. I can't change Mary. She's either going to take her shoes off or she's not going to take her shoes off. But me forcing her to take her shoes off, or guilting her into taking her shoes off, or bribing her into taking her shoes off, or whatever is going to have a limited effect. Like, let's be honest, changing other people doesn't work, nor is it very flattering. I'll talk about that in a second, but let's just be very practical at first and just agree that it doesn't really work. I mean, let's see, how many things have you tried to change about yourself, and how's that going for you? I'll tell you, there's a lot of things I've tried to change about myself, and there's very few of them in which I've been successful. Only the ones in which, I wanted and God helped me did I make any progress. And even in those things, I tend to relapse a lot. So if you're very punctual and the other person is not punctual at all, please don't expect them to suddenly become punctual. And if you berate them for their lack of punctuality and this and that, and it's disrespectful and yada, 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 sure, fine. And they will be punctual for a day, a week, a month, 3 months. When I was doing my master's degree, God gave me this beautiful opportunity to do this wonderful course-based master's. And I decided this is the year I'm going to be punctual. Like, I'm going to figure this thing out. I'm never on time for anything. I'm, usually about 10 minutes plus or minus 5 minutes late for everything in life, even if I try my very best. So I decided, okay, I'm going to be on time. That's when I realized that there's no such thing as being on time. Like, the likelihood that you're going to be perfectly on time is next to nil, right? So that you only have 2 options, be late or be early. Obviously, being early would be better than being late. So I said, okay, let's plan to be early. I'm going to plan to be 5 minutes early for everything. Guess what? I was about 10 minutes late for everything. So it's like, okay, maybe then I need to plan for being 15 minutes early for everything. You know what? It worked about 80% of the time, but I was still late about 20% of the time. So I was like, okay, at what point could I safely know I'm going to be on time? I had to actually plan to be 45 minutes early. So if I wanted to be here for 8, I'd have to plan to be here at 7:15, and that means like, accounting for the traffic, and that really means accounting for everything that I can possibly account for. And I would still end up being on time or 5 to 15 minutes early. That's me. Maybe for you, you didn't need to do that, right? And that's how I figured out how to be on time. I literally have to add 45 minutes to whatever thing that I have scheduled. If I really want to be on time, how long do you think that lasted for, right? The master's degree, where I had like 12 hours of class, and the rest of my life was in my own hands. You know what I mean? As soon as I went back to being a resident, working 80 to 100 hours a week, that went out the window. I can't afford to, I'm going to have coffee with one person for an hour. I can't afford to schedule that for 2 hours in my calendar. It's just going to be what it's going to be. I'll try to be there on time, and everybody knows that I'm, a tad late, and that's life. You accept me, you love me, you hate me. I don't know. Take it for what it is. It is what it is. That's who I am, and you learn to expect it, right? And that's what you do. You learn to expect it. Your expectation changes. You can't force your partner to be punctual, but you can change. You can't change your partner, but you can change yourself. You have options, right? Suppose your expectations don't meet up. You can choose to be perpetually frustrated for the rest of your relationship with this person. That doesn't sound very pleasant. Are there any other options? Yeah, there are. You can choose to tell this person a different time than the actual time you want them to be there. You can tell them to be there 20 minutes early, and then they have to wait for you for 10 minutes, right? And they can get a taste of what it feels like. Yeah, you can do that if you want. It's vindictive, maybe not the healthiest, kind of attitude to have. What's something else you can do? Well, you can choose to be on time and let live and let them be late if they're going to be late, and just bring something to occupy yourself. Because if you were a betting person and you had to bet $100 about whether they're going to be on time or not, you probably bet, and you're not a gambler, but you would probably bet that they are indeed going to be a bit late. So bring something to entertain yourself. Bring something you want to do. Bring some work you need to get finished. Use the time, and then it's not frustrating. In fact, I have a friend who's always about half an hour late, even more late than me. It's hard to imagine. And I actually love meeting up with him, because every time I meet up with him, I know that I get half an hour of time to myself, right? This is half an hour that's already spoken for in my calendar, can't get scheduled for anything else. And I would do work during that time, and then I would say, wait a minute, this is half an hour where you can do whatever you want. Everybody thinks you're having coffee with so-and-so, right? But you're not. So you could sleep, you can walk, you can do headstands, you can do whatever pleases your heart, right? And I've learned to realize this is the best thing in the world. I wish everybody was late, right? So it's up to you. You can't change the other person, but you can change your expectation to try to match up with the other person as much as possible. So long as what? So long as your expectation is not a non-negotiable, because then you'd really be changing your identity, you'd be changing who you are. And that's not fair to you, and it's not fair to the other person. It's not fair to the other person because you're pretending to be somebody you're not, right? So you're essentially putting on a show. Yes, to please the other person, but that's not fair to the other person. The person should have the right to be with the real you if they want to be with the real you, and not be with the real you if they don't want to be with the real you. So you shouldn't have to fool them. And it's obviously not fair to you because you're not getting the opportunity to live out the expression of who you are, right? So your non-negotiable expectations, there's no need to apologize for them or whatever, but there is a need for us to know them, understand them, and live according to them. Okay, we talked about toothpaste and shoes at the doorway. Can you give us some other examples? Here's a pretty useful one, right? Do you have siblings? Who here has siblings? Okay, let's talk about birth order. Where are you in the birth order? Are you the firstborn? Okay. Secondborns? Third? fourth, fifth. That's a lot of siblings, right? Okay, so here's a concept. You know, you have brothers and sisters, or do you not have brothers and sisters? What was that like for you growing up? What was it like to have brothers and sisters? What was it not like to have brothers and sisters? Is the fact that you are the eldest or the second or the third or the baby in the family, how has that affected who you are? And how's that affected your expectation of the people that you live with? You know, which at that time were your siblings, maybe your parents, right? But in the future will be your spouse. And it's very strange that these things are super transferable. That what you expected, you know, of your older brother is now what you expect of your wife. Like there's like no relationship whatsoever, other than this is how I'm used to relating to the person that I live with, right? And you know, and now here's a new person that I'm living with. And it's strange that our subconscious would transfer these expectations from that person onto that person. So, what was it like growing up? What was it like being, you know, in that birth order? Here's another one for you. In every group of siblings, there's usually an alpha sibling. That person tends to make most of the decisions. That person tends to convince the group to kind of get their way. That person tends to be a bit more of a leader, a bit of a challenger, a bit more maybe assertive. We don't want to say aggressive, but whatever. You know, how many of you do you think, when you reflect on your sibling group, you and your brothers and sisters, you know, would you say you're an alpha sibling? You are the one who is kind of more of the leader, more of the one who sort of like would suggest things and, you know, debate and advocate for them. And usually, you know, let's say at least in the small majority of times, 51 to 60% of the time end up getting your way. Who would say they're an alpha sibling? I was actually blessed with a sister, an older sister who loved me so much, admired me so much. Well, really, it should be the other way around. She's far, far better of a human being than me. That, you know, she kind of made me the alpha sibling, you know, although it's kind of not so much in my character. But yeah, okay, what was that like for you? And how much of that do you think is going to transfer over into living with a partner? You know, are you used to being the alpha? Do you like being the alpha? You know, or was that maybe, like in my case, that was a role that was put on you rather than a role that you took? How's that going to play into your marriage? You know, what do you think? What do you expect? Nobody's asking you to predict word for word what's going to happen with a partner that you haven't even met yet, or a partner that you have. Sure, I agree, right? But for sure, you have an expectation. You have an expectation about all these things, tiny little things and the big things. You know, are you a saver? Are you a spender when it comes to money? Is money something you talk about or something you don't talk about? Are feelings something you talk about or something that you don't talk about? Forgive me for being so brash as to say, is intimacy, physical intimacy, something that you talk about or that you don't talk about? If it's something that you never talk about, you never talked about it with your friends, you never talk about it with anybody else, if somebody ever brings up something like that, you make a joke and you just laugh it off, that's fine. No harm, no foul. But that's obviously something you're not so comfortable talking about. It's unlikely that you're going to meet this person you're head over heels for. You love so much, you give up anything in the world for, and you suddenly become comfortable talking about physical intimacy. If you were never comfortable talking about it before, you're probably not going to be that comfortable talking about it later. And that's not good or bad. It just is what it is. But that's your expectation of life. So if you have a partner who has no filter and they're willing to talk about what happened in bed last night over breakfast tomorrow, and you're like, no, man, like that was last night. That was night John. This is morning John. Morning John, you know, has not gone through sex ed. You know, like morning John can't hear about those things. Morning John, right? Like you need to know those things about yourself, you know? And if those things are deal breakers or showstoppers, and you know that this is a deal breaker or showstopper about yourself, I bet you, without even asking the question, in the first 5 days, if you know what your showstoppers are, what your deal breakers are, I bet you within the first 5 days, you'll be able to identify the majority of them if they are there in your partner, without even asking about them. And then when you develop enough of a closeness, you can ask about them. So that's a little bit of a summary of what I have to say about expectations. Okay, well, come on now. You talked to us about toothpaste, about shoes, about money, a little bit about sex, birth orders, siblings. There's got to be a whole lot more to it than that. You're telling me I have expectations of life about everything, even the temperature in the room, right? Yeah, you're right. And it would take forever to go through every single one of them and ask you to put up your hand for every single one of them and look around the room and see who agrees with you and who doesn't, right? That would take forever, right? But honestly, if you just do some soul searching, I think you'll discover also a law of diminishing returns. You know, I think if you sit there with a paper and pen, a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine, forced me to do this. He forced me to sit down with a paper and a pen and write down all of my musts and all of my wants. And it was hard. And I edited that list over and over and over again for a few years. And then I lost it. And then I got married. And then I found that I don't really know exactly what was on that list, but it seems like she's the one, right? So that it was a very fruitful exercise. What I'm getting at here is I'm not suggesting that you write this list and then you go through life cross-referencing every human with the actual list. I'm suggesting that the exercise is indispensable to figuring out who's a good fit for you and who isn't. It's not the actual list, because nobody's going to be the actual tailor-made, custom-made, right? No. Mary doesn't take her shoes off in the house. Okay, fine. I have to learn how to live with that. Get a lot of other pluses, to offset the shoes, right? But the exercise made it easy for me to be like, wow, that's an awesome person. And made it easy for me to realize I think this person is an excellent fit for me. And you can do the same. And the ideal time is actually to do it when you're not in a relationship. Because when you are in a relationship, especially if you really want it to work out, sometimes we trick ourselves into thinking we're okay with things that we're really not as okay with, So it's best if you can do this at an unbiased time. If you're like, thanks, Sabuna, but I still feel like you left me with more questions than I had when I first got here, then I've achieved my goal. That's what I want you to do. I want you to be curious. Curious about what? The world? No, curious about yourself. And if you feel that you're curious but still lost, I have a 115-page document full of questions, all questions like this. Some of them are the toothpaste and the shoes, and some of them are much deeper. Do you want to have children? How many children do you want to have? How late in life would you be willing to have children? At what point would you say, no, this is too much of life has already passed, or whatever, would you ever adopt? Would you not adopt? Would you foster? I mean, these are all really big questions, and they might actually be showstoppers for you, and you don't even know it. So I could send the file to Abuna, and he can circulate it to you if you think it would be helpful. But I would say before you even open it, just do some soul searching, because you'll dig up at least 60 to 80% of whatever is relevant to you, right? Really just by asking yourself, what do I absolutely have to have in a person? And what is a nice to have, but, I could figure it out if it wasn't there. Glory be to God. If I said anything to offend anybody or whatever, I recognize that I have some pretty wild ideas. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. I was not referencing any particular relationship or any particular person other than myself and my wife, who I identified by our true names. I really hope I didn't offend anybody.
Thank you so much, Abuna.
Thank you.